Good evening. How are we all? Welcome to EventHuddle number 6. And just before we start, because of the subject, I guess I should point out the fire exits so that one's here and one's here. The evacuation point is right outside the building in Wimpole Street. And then we move around the corner to John Lewis in Cavendish Square, House of Fraser. So today we are talking about terror threat and security, and the question is, are we doing enough to keep delegates and events safe? As usual, I'm joined with an amazing panel, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. So on my left, Simon Hughes. Simon.
Hello, I'm Simon Hughes. I'm the Vice Chair of the Business Visits and Events Partnership, and I run a consultancy that works in the event sector. More importantly, for 10 years I had the dubious pleasure of working for the Central Office of Information, providing government events across the UK and internationally. As a result of that very first-hand experience, I've thought about security, been subject to security, and have woken up screaming as a result of that security.
But still looking very well on that.
But still feeling reasonably good, yes.
On my immediate left, Simon Garrett.
Hello, Simon Garrett. I'm the Managing Director of Venture Global Risk Solutions. We are a risk and protection specialist agency in the events business, so health, safety and security. I have a military background. I was an intelligence analyst, so I have some counter-terrorism experience. I was the operations director of Earl's Court for a number of years, and subsequently morphed into the sort of specialism of health, safety and security. I'm a chartered fellow of IOSH for the safety nerds amongst you.
IOSH?
Yes.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, Institution of Occupational Safety and Health.
Okay. Here's Mark Blair.
Mark Blair, Divisional Director of InEvexco. I've worked in the insurance area for 25 years. I started when I was 6. I've worked across aviation, entertainment industries. I've worked for 14 different United Nations agencies, and the last 15 years I've just been working in the events industry for insurance companies, insurance brokers, and for UBM and Reed as well.
Thank you. And on my far right, Chris Woodford.
Hi, Chris. I'm the Head of Safety from Capita, Head of Event Safety. Primarily involved in emergency and contingency planning on mass participation events, so everything from the London Marathon through to Velothon and most of the major cycle and sporting events that take place across Europe and indeed now the Middle East.
Thank you. So to start the debate, the first question is, are we keeping our delegates and events safe enough? Simon?
Yes, I think is the straight answer to that. But there's probably more that we should be doing. And the more we should be doing, I think, is really as a result of some of the things that we've seen over the last several years. So by and large, I think the kind of supplier chain of venue, production agency, DMC are working very well in terms of looking after our delegates. But I think given the level of risk that exists, and we've been at the same level of risk for a considerable period of time, there's probably a lot more that we should be thinking about, there's more we should be doing. Just out of interest, I looked at some of the kind of guidance that's available from both the Home Office and the Security Industries Agency. There's a lot of guidance out there, freely available, some very good stuff amongst it, and it's all dated 2008, 2009, and it's just guidance. So there's an issue there, I think. So there is more that we should be doing, without doubt.
Simon, from your perspective, risk assessment, are we keeping our delegates and events safe enough?
I agree, but my caveat would be it depends on your event, and risk assessment, threat assessment in this case, is key to that. So you have to look at the combination of, you know, what do we perceive as the threat, and mostly here and now the topic is, you know, global jihad and all that entails, and why might my event be a target, and if we were a target, how would we be vulnerable? And uncomfortable as it is to sort of confront that, it needs to be confronted, and I would concur that I pick up far too many documents and read far too many documents that are out of date, some of which, you know, was rooted in the days when we were dealing with Irish Republican terrorism and other things, and it's moved on. The threat is different, and those go-to solutions of let's search everybody with a metal arch or get out a few dogs might be part of the solution, but not necessarily. We need to be far more nuanced as to the way we approach this, and we have to ask ourselves some fairly searching questions, I think.
Would you say we know enough about the threat or the threat that we're facing?
No,
or do you think we're in the dark and
again,
ignorance is bliss?
If you reach back to the more established forms of terrorism we were dealing with, these were organisations that you're dealing with a death cult, an ideology. You can't. There isn't, and it is morphing and it is changing. So it isn't the fault of government or the fault of organisations that we don't understand it. It is the nature of the threat which is evolving, and that's the problem. And I probably just take up the issue of the threat level in the UK has not changed, and that is true. But that's actually quite a wide band, and you can either be at the bottom of that or at the top of that, and I would guess in some cases the threat to your particular event might be higher than that banding would suggest.
Just to build on that thought, the attacks in Paris, in particular at the Stade de France, I was talking to a production manager who's working at the big Syria conference at the QE2 last week, and he's doing an MSc in crowd control. And he said the events in Paris at the Stade de France have completely shaken all of the thinking around what you should be doing in large stadia, and that they're having to kind of rethink their approach now as a result of the tactics that were being deployed in that incident. And in particular, the external barriers and the external checks actually worked quite well, because they caught out one bomber trying to go through the gates. The other two outside were waiting for the egress. They were waiting for the crowd to come out, and then they were going to kill themselves, and as many of the other people would be as safe as possible. So, you know, that thing of things moving on and developing is really true, and we're facing kind of challenges around that right now.
Mr. Blair, from your perspective of the insurance industry, are we keeping our delegates and events safe?
I'm not sure you can ever do enough. Personally, is my honest opinion, and the reason why I say that is because who are our threats? We don't know who they are. We think we know who they are, and we think we know who they are from a physical perspective, but from a cyber and from an online perspective, we don't know who these threats are. They can be anywhere, and I think that we seem to be focusing a lot on the property and the physical side of risk management and security and terrorism. And I actually think that we now need to be putting just as much focus on the cyber and the online risk to our businesses, and therefore, as a result, the events.
And what's that going to take for us to do that?
Unfortunately, I think what it might take is an online attack. You know, we know that there have been attacks made on data. We know that there have been people that have sourced people's card information, personal information. We know that there is a bigger audience out there for European card data than US card data. We know that. And unfortunately, what will happen is, at some point, there will be an attack. And it's not going to be a physical attack. And we kind of need to be aware of that a little bit. And we need to be including that as part of our crisis management plans, as part of our communication plans, media communications plans. Those are the sorts of things that I think we need to be including.
Okay. Chris, from your perspective as someone who is responsible for event safety, are we doing enough to keep our events and our delegates safe?
I think in a lot of areas we are. I do believe it's primarily concerned with the type of event, the type of venue, the type of profile. And every comment that's been made here is so relevant, particularly the cyber one. But I think we need to start looking at this potential new threat in cybercrime, not just as on the fraud side, but also the dissemination of information, the miscommunication and misdirection angle. It's something I've never seen, and I'm not sure if it's ever happened or occurred. But with the use of social media and the cyber technologies we have today, it's something we need to investigate. We need to communicate that, and we need to have this all-round joint thinking between the likes of people who are sat around the table, the event organisers. Yeah. There needs to be that joined-up approach to looking holistically at what else could there be out there, and where else could we go and find that information? Because as has been pointed out there, it's 10 years out of date.
Yeah.
Maybe we need to develop it ourselves.
So do you think that's one of the answers, to have more eyes on the topic than not?
I think you've got to. And I think you've got to keep abreast of it. You've got to spend, the next one coming, you've got to spend some money there depending on the size and scale. You've got to invest in putting protections and places and protocols in place so you can identify it. It's no good having an event with 10,000 people and no one's going to monitor the social media. We know that doesn't happen now, and everyone's very tech savvy. But it's then identifying within that social media and within that cyber world, what is a threat and potentially what isn't.
Okay.
And then what do we do about it?
Okay, next question, Simon, Garrett. I'm going to throw to you, actually, from your background. It's probably relevant. Do you think the responsibility for this falls with the venue, or do you think it's somewhere else?
Well, when I was a venue director, all my clients thought it fell to the venue. I can tell you that. This has to be. We have to get this joined up a lot better than it has been previously, and I think organisers need to take far more responsibility for this than they all want to do. We tend to look at this as a venue issue because a lot of the time the venue either supplies the security or there's a sort of preferred security contractor. But this is very different in the sense that we're not trying to. Yes, we want to stop people losing their laptops and stuff like that, but the threat is very different now. There wouldn't be, unless the organiser brings an event to a venue, then there wouldn't be an event to attack.
Yeah.
And it is as I said before, it is the context of that event, what you're doing, where and why, that brings with it the other half of the threat in terms of if you're a jihadist or part of a jihadist organisation and you want to attack something, you've still got to notice that something is there and is providing you with a target. So I think in those terms it's much more the organiser. Of course, it rather depends on what sort of business you're in. If you look at the Stade de France has already been raised, and the Bataclan Theatre and all of those, clearly those were venue-led. If you're into sporting and some of those are venue-led events, so there is no organiser per se. Yeah. In which case, yes, of course, that is very much a venue responsibility. But I think venues, whether it's the venue or where it's the organiser, there needs to be a much more holistic approach. The venue does bring a lot to the party in the sense that they have the contacts with the police and intelligence services officially and a lot of unofficial ones, if they're any good. And they will be much more joined up, and they will notice the thing that isn't right. So, perhaps in a way that the organiser wouldn't. Just to take us, finish the point by taking us out to Paris, because I actually went to a major trade exhibition in Paris immediately after, a week after the attacks. I was asked to go there by the organiser and help, and mostly it was the organisers doing. But the one thing the venue had was an anti-pickpocketing team, and I cottoned on to the fact that what these guys were looking for was somebody behaving in a way which was not consistent with the way an exhibitor or a visitor would behave. Now, they were looking for pickpockets, I was looking for terrorists, but to be honest, the methodology was right on. So I said, okay, stop looking for... If you find anybody who's behaving in a way that doesn't fit with what we're doing here, then we need to target those. And I think there is an example of a venue providing a service which the organiser hadn't really thought of. And so, you know, they were helping, but it still wasn't joined up enough. That was the issue. The venue were getting on with it, and the organiser was doing their thing, and it needed joining up.
Okay.
I
Mark,
think
so who pays your bill? Is it the venue or is it the organiser?
the organiser.
Okay.
But
So do you see that as where the responsibility lies?
I think it's kind of there has to be the big crossover. So thinking about this, so that the constant with any event is the venue. So the venue is there, it's fixed, and they know what plans they have in place. They have, as Simon said, they have good relationships with local authorities, with police, with intelligence services. They should therefore have a plan in place to, in the event of there being a problem, they know what they have to then follow. The variable is the organiser, the variable is the delegates, the variable are the exhibitors, the variable are the visitors, the talent, whoever it may be, and of course the contractors. They then all have their own responsibilities. And I think it's kind of a bit of a Venn diagram. It should be that the venue should be sharing their plans as much as confidentially as they possibly can, sharing their plans with the people who plan to then come in and take part in the event. They may have some specific knowledge with regards to a particular subject. They may have some particular experience or history in that particular area, and if they share that with the organiser, they can work together.
Yeah.
But my honest answer is it shouldn't just fall onto one. It really should be a group consolidation.
Okay. Chris, venue or other? And what happens when the venue isn't a venue, like the London Marathon?
Or the Boston Marathon.
Or the Boston Marathon.
I didn't want to bring that up, but thank
Sorry.
you.
Well, no, that was an interesting case in point, the Boston Marathon, because it was a week before the London Marathon, and a lot of lessons were actually being learnt at the time and were learnt from it. I always say the event organiser, to be perfectly honest, rather than the venue, because of the type of activities they carry out. But it's a really interesting point when you say the planning and the communication and the threat should be communicated between the venue and the organisers. But I have a major issue with that at the moment, in that isn't being done. And it deliberately is not being done. There are venues not a million miles away that will refuse point blank to give you their evacuation and emergency procedures in case it breaches their security, which puts the event organiser in a massive quandary as to what they then do to succeed their liabilities and their responsibilities. So again, I keep coming back to it still needs some joined up communication and thinking, and it needs taking further forward. I think we're still stuck in the past.
Yeah. Simon Hughes, so if we have a divergence of opinion on the panel, venue or organiser, isn't that one of the problems? Isn't that going to be an opportunity for...
I think it has to be an opportunity because there is no right answer, and actually making sure that the venue is as aware as possible of whatever the protocols are or the procedures are is essential. I spent 10 years running around the country with senior politicians, and when we had the principals with us, there was a van full of guys armed to the teeth who never spoke to us, never spoke to my team, never spoke to the venue, but if anything bad happened, they'd be right there and all hell would break loose. But that didn't account in any way for the members of the public we had joining those meetings. It didn't account for the other cabinet members we had there or the local politicians. It was all about the principle. There was no kind of crossover in terms of a conversation between the venue, the organisers, or ourselves. If something bad happens, they're fine. What happens to everybody else in the room? So there does need to be some work on that. And interestingly, the staff at the QE2 last week doing the Syria Pledge Conference, one of the things that the anti-terrorism people said was, your staff have been very good because they challenged us every single time we came in. They didn't just assume that it was yet another load of people wandering in with guns.
Yep.
They actually said, do you know where you're going? Can we help you? Are you? So there was that kind of, constant talking to them. And that relationship between all the different parties, where you are, the venues are demonstrating that they're thinking about this, they train their staff, and their staff are following a kind of protocol and a procedure. That just enhances that relationship, and that's what's required, is much more forging of dialogue and communication, so that everybody knows what's going to happen in case something goes wrong.
I suppose it's one of the strengths of the event industry. We do everything collaboratively. No one can put an event on their own, and you're just saying that we need to do more of that to encompass the security aspects.
Yes.
Yeah.
Can I add a point, actually? Because if you take any topic and say venue or organiser, there'll be a spat about it.
It depends whether you're a venue or an organiser.
Yes, and it will be a commercial argument, and frankly, the better negotiator wins. So who provides first aid? Well, it doesn't really matter as long as someone does. The problem with this issue is we cannot afford to be arguing about it, and we can't have a gap in the middle. We can't, and I think that's the issue. That's the difference with this issue as opposed to some of the other ones.
We don't need a Venn diagram. We need a pyramid. Yeah. Mark, you spoke earlier about something. So there's a question here about how do we screen our employees?
Yeah, I actually think there's another argument here to say how do we screen our delegates and the people that are actually coming to our event as well, but maybe we'll come on to that later on. In terms of the employees, from our experience, and I'm guessing probably from everyone around the room here, we never have enough staff. We never have enough staff at the events. We never have the required talent exactly on hand at any required time. So we're looking at consultants. So we're bringing in consultants. If we think about security consultants, if we think about how we actually source them, how we train them, are they who we think they are? Are we asking them to come to an event before the actual event that we want them to be working with us at?
Yeah.
Because then we can make sure they are who we are expecting them to be. The ever-changing world of consultants means that potentially a threat to the event could come along and say, hey, look, Kevin mentioned that he wants me to go over here, and suddenly he's got access to a restricted area.
Yeah.
He may want to walk in and say, well, hold on, who's responsible here? Oh, it's Kirk. I can then go straight over to someone else and say, look, Kirk's told me that's where I need to go.
Yeah.
Screening is such a really important area, and again, we don't know. I'm sorry, I don't want to repeat myself. I repeat myself quite a lot.
You've never done that.
Yeah, exactly. But we don't know who our threats are, and we really need to be thinking. I don't want us to be massively paranoid, but we kind of do need to be thinking and double-checking on all of these things.
So, Chris, are we good enough at screening delegates, employees, in your experience?
I don't think we go far enough, to be honest. I think it's a really valid point. A lot of events will spend an awful lot of money on screening, mainly for commercial purposes, and RFID tagging and all the rest of it. And it could be utilised in many other different ways. It could be put to better uses as well as making money. If you've got it and you've spent the money on it, why not branch out? We spend an absolute fortune on checking the people who come through the door, who are spending the money. As you quite rightly point out, we don't check the people we've got on the inside already. They're not part of that screening and RFID tagging 99% of the time. We don't check the event security through the same system and the RFID tagging and checking system. So I think the technology's there, the ability's there. I just don't think we utilise it properly.
I don't suppose we're even thinking about it in that way, are we?
I wouldn't have thought so, to be honest, and it may be a commercial decision. Aren't most things at the end of the day, is there a big enough budget to extend it that far? But I think it's something we should be looking at. If we want to provide all-round cover and screening, then you can't just look on the outside. We have to start, I believe, on the inside and work our way out. Consultants, security guards. Why can't the stage manager be RFID tagged?
Yep, absolutely. So Simon, I know you've worked on the whatever they are, G. How many people in the G now? Because I've done a couple, and the security is so tight, the staff end up sleeping on site under tables, and because they can't get in and out within 4 or 5 hours.
Yes, yeah. So yes, I've been at the kind of extreme end of some security procedures, and it's a really interesting question. Thinking about the inside, how many events rely on temporary staff being brought in? Your catering supplier, for example, going, right, where are all the students, folks? I need them now because I need 200 people. How close are they vetted? Are we sure they're exactly who they say they are? Some people on long-term contracts for that kind of supply to a venue will have made sure that they vetted those people and will have a kind of regular pool of people. When we did public events, when we went out with the Prime Minister and the Cabinet, we had everybody had to register, so we used technology to capture details. We captured key bits of information, and then we checked that with the local force. And anybody that got flagged was uninvited very quickly. And it could have been for anything. There were a number of criteria we set in place. So there are techniques, and there are procedures, and there are ways of dealing with it, but it takes time, it takes effort, it takes people being prepared to put that in ahead of time and plan it as part of the whole production cycle. And that's often one of the really big challenges.
Absolutely.
The only other thought is the real challenge, I think, and Simon alluded to this earlier, is if you're planning major events and you're worried about who's coming and what's going to happen, is you look for unusual activity. And certainly we took something up to Liverpool, and somebody who was on a watch list 2 days before appeared in the wrong car and went to a travel agent. And that was just that sequence of events was enough for him to come out of the travel agent and find himself facing 4 armed policemen who put him in the back of a van and took him away and talked to him about what he was doing. So unusual, erratic, slightly out of the normal behaviour ahead of things is also a great indicator of where you might want to kind of close down and say, okay, that might be a risk. We need to look at it more carefully.
I was with an organiser just yesterday, and he was at a large venue. I want to be very careful. I don't want to give away too much information, but he was at a large venue. He was building up in one part of the venue, and there was another event that was being built up in a different part of the venue. And there was someone who was found acting suspiciously. Of course, they informed the police, they got them involved, they did whatever they needed to do. The police did exactly the same, took her in a van and spoke to her. But his question to me was, why didn't she just register for the event, go the next day when it was open, false information, false details, and she could have walked around by herself. Now, lucky for him, she didn't think about that.
Yeah.
But, what if she did?
Would have taken a lot. So, Simon, when you look at risk assessment, do you look at the employee pool?
Yes, but to a certain extent, any risk assessment will take the context of the people that are going to be there.
Yeah.
But from a security point of view, it's more, are they a draw or are they more likely to be in a risk group? I'd say something sort of slightly controversial here. If we scrapped all of the screening we did, I don't think it would make a blind bit of difference to this threat. And I'll put it out there now. We've got to start actually facing some of the issues. Anybody in a contractor's T-shirt carrying a box can walk into a venue.
Yeah.
When I did the Madonna concert at Earls Court, I had 2,000 caterers on site, just there. And in Paris, looking at it, I was saying, the reality here is that, and this is particular to that place, where they have these sort of suburbs where the disenfranchised immigrant labour. All of the people who were the security officers and the caterers and the cleaners and all the rest of it lived cheek by jowl next to the people who were probably either connected to the jihadists that they've just been dealing with. And it is that issue that we've got. Screening would not have done anything with that. You can't screen out that. Just because he's wearing the T-shirt doesn't mean to say he works for the company. Yeah. the events industry is hugely vulnerable because we don't employ anyone. We pay a lot of people, but not directly employ national insurance number, all the rest of it.
Yeah.
The whole business relies on this massive triangle pool of temporary staff and all the rest of it, and that's the nature of the business. So we have to think differently, and we're probably going to come on to it. But we're too fixated by people coming into the event. If I want to get into an event, I can without a pass. It is. I usually walk in through the catering entrance, but there are so many ways of doing it. And I'll leave just one thought. The other, high-vis vests, which we're now also keen on because of CDM regulations and all the rest of it. And you usually have the organiser's name on the back, don't they?
Yep.
Well, the other day I stole a box of them. That's it. That's a pass. Wear a high-vis vest, organiser's name on the back. Through you go. It is so easy. Screening, doesn't do anything. Now there are reasons, good reasons in many cases, to do some screening. So I'm not saying abandon it all, but just be aware of the shortcomings.
Yeah. Has anyone got any questions? Is about the risk of health scares, so SARS, and what do we do about that? Is there a process and a procedure?
There are processes and procedures that, and on a local level, I think that was put in quite a few years back when we had, what was it, the avian bird flu, and then we had the mad cows running all over the place, and the Chinese flu and everything else. I think locally, especially up in Cumbria and on the northwest, and some events that were up there, there were exclusion zones set up. That was quite in fairness, that was quite an easy one, especially with the cow and the sheep problems, because they're a physical thing. It's not an airborne, it's a physical thing. You could actually tell everyone to walk through a bucket of disinfectant or a mat with disinfectant on it, and you could take some measures. Airborne, I don't think there's nothing you can do. That's then a threat and a risk decision. Do you actually carry on if it's that bad? Do you actually hold the event at all? Is it morally right to hold the event?
Yeah.
I think it's down to. I think every organisation, if every organisation could actually reach within itself and say, okay, what is our risk tolerance? Because I think, and it applies to every situation, be it sort of the normal health safety stuff or terrorism or SARS or whatever it is. What is the risk tolerance? Do we take the risk? What is? And it's no good looking at your health and safety manager or your security manager. This is a board level decision to say, fine, we've got this policy, a strategic policy. The reward for taking risks is profit at root. That's what we're doing. And part of those risks are exactly what you say. And that is, I think the only area where you really have to sort of think hard about it is not that there's a difference morally, but where you're exposing your own staff, there are specific legal duties of care that you have to think very carefully about before you deploy. Quite a lot of my clients have offices in those places, and Nigeria is one of them. So they'll have a local office that runs the event. So the question doesn't arise, but you still have to attract visitors in, and therefore you've got to think. And there will be certain other threshold issues. So here it's usually when the government starts closing the schools, your event's over anyway. So, but there'll be those things.
And deciding who the arbiter is. So the last international event I was involved with, there was civil unrest going on, and we were able to say, okay, if the FCO says no, it's no. And all hell broke loose because there were lots of corporates involved, sponsors and partners going, that's not good enough. But that was the line we drew. If their travel advice goes to no, it's not safe, then we don't go, and the whole thing's off. There's nothing any of us can do about it. So getting, establishing where the parameter is and sticking to that, I think helps.
Where your travel insurance vetoes it, that's vetoed, isn't it?
Yeah.
You're off.
Absolutely.
David.
Kevin,
Of course.
I come from a corporate events background. So you've been discussing a lot where there's an organiser and a venue. When you go to a corporate, obviously you've got the third party, which is the client.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing on the number of events that I've worked on, particularly I worked with Swift on the Cybos event, is their
I know it well.
security people are the ones that drive security and safety. Nothing to do with the venue, nothing to do with the agency or anything else like that who's involved in it, but they have a security policy and they're the ones that are driving. And I think that's the key thing here, is it's somebody actually taking ownership of it.
Yeah. I think that's the thing. Someone has to be lead in that.
I know Cydos, and I went through the process of the vetting. So, working for my client, there was a third-party vetting of whether the organiser was doing enough on the protection issues.
Yeah.
And that happens a lot, which is a very healthy process, because it's totally objective.
Yeah. And you know, as an organisation, they have security within them anyway, built into their whole system.
Yes.
So in which case it's familiar, but not every organisation is like that. Now, we were in Hong Kong with the bird flu, and we cancelled the event.
Yeah.
They had to cancel the event because there's absolutely no way, as you say, you could expose 5,000 people to an airborne risk like that. But they took the responsibility and they took the decision, not the venue, not the organiser, but the client. And I think that's a part of the debate here, is where does the actual responsibility for decision making lie?
And to ensure there's no gaps in that decision making collective. Michael.
Yeah, can I ask two questions? What's the right level of messaging to your customers? Do you tell them you're safe and secure and you've done everything, or does that risk them being their attention drawn to the fact there are safety and security risks? And the second, in terms of retrieving the reputational risk after an event has taken place, how do you get back up and running and get that assuredness back into the marketplace?
Mr. Hughes.
Well, I think on the first, if we look at what's happened post-Paris, large stadia, Emirates being a good example, have now deployed a completely new type of security. So there's a kind of human barrier checking people, and then there are further checks when you actually go through the gates. And they've advised people about these checks. So they haven't said we're safe. What they've said is, if you want to come and watch a match here, you need to allow extra time. And the Arsenal fans in particular are used to kind of wandering up with 10 minutes to go and just walking in the front door, but that doesn't happen anymore. You actually do have to create more time. So they've communicated that through social media, they've engaged with their fan base to alert them to the fact, and they've done the same with visiting fans as well. So they're not saying it's all cool, they're saying give us a bit more time, you understand why, and this is part of our kind of treating you as our, as part of the family that comes to this particular football club. So I think there are kind of ways of doing that, but there are examples of how people are not saying we're okay, but we need to do stuff and we're letting you know about it.
And what about the second half of that question, which is how do you get how you re-establish your reputation after?
Yeah. Not my massive area of speciality, but from a personal experience, if you want, of watching a large multi-million-dollar organisation, corporation, stick its neck on the line with a reputation, watch it slowly slide and then pick it back up again, was New Year's Eve in Dubai, when you have their flagship hotel that's burning from the 21st floor upwards.
Yeah. Next to the Burj.
And the decision on my shoulders and one other is do we carry on firing 40 tons of fireworks around the place? The decision from the American media, who'd taken the live feed, if you want, stolen the live feed very well, was to castigate the client, castigate the organisation, and the decision behind it to actually carry on with a New Year's Eve celebration. From my point of view, from a safety angle, crowd management, crowd dynamics, personal safety, it was a very easy decision. We could fire safely. And what do we do with 1.5 million people standing there waiting for fireworks to go off if we don't do it? But then to watch the PR machine kick into action, addressing their reputation, was absolutely fascinating. To watch a dedicated team send the right messages, go back and answer the points in much the same way I think we've seen this week in the football world, with a large organisation saying, sorry, might have actually overstepped that one, we won't put the tickets up much next year, we'll do something else. Yeah. And it wasn't a condescending way they did it, it was a very open, frank, honest, you know what, we've made a decision, this is where we're going to go for the greater good of people and their personal safety. And I think that openness, that honesty, it actually did endear them to people. The number of hits and their reputation just suddenly rocketed through the roof. I don't know if it's a be-all and an end-all, but it's certainly an answer.
Just to pick up on your first question about, and this is something that particularly interests me because I'm wondering to what extent a venue or an organiser would benefit or potentially not by actually broadcasting what their crisis management plan might be, or broadcasting what work they had done to say to the delegates, look, you can come to our event with relative security or relative safety or relative peace of mind because these are the checks that we've done. I don't know how people would react to that. I don't know if people would be more happy to come to an event, or maybe people might see that they is an increased risk. Simon, from your point of view, with the QE2, what did you do? Yeah, sorry. Yeah. So what did you do in terms of publishing or letting people know about what it was that you had in place?
It was very measured. And I think that's probably a cultural thing for us here in Britain, that we are, I certainly would reflect on things like Lee Rigby and that awful killing that took place. There was a lot of concern immediately after that there would be quite a heavy-handed response, and there were a few incidents of attacks. But actually, we were very, as a nation, we were very measured in our response to that. We didn't overreact. We weren't heavy-handed, and I think that tends to reflect the way we as an industry work too. We don't go overboard. We are measured and thoughtful and considerate about the way we talk to people, the way we engage people, the way we inform people, and the way we treat people physically as they come into our events. And I think that's a huge strength for the industry. Perhaps the call for, from out of a discussion like this tonight is we just need to be really focused on making sure that those measured things are backed up with the right conversations with the right people at the right time.
Yep. Sorry, Michael.
You talked earlier about the choice between the venue and the organiser who's responsible, but there is a wider picture because we're entirely dependent on people getting to our venues and to our events, and transport providers are right in the middle of some of the most horrendous atrocities that have gone on.
Yeah.
What's the responsibility of the events sector to be talking to transport providers about what they are doing and what more they could do to ensure the safety of our delegates' arrival and attendees at big exhibitions? Given that they've got to go through airports and they've got to get on trains and they've got to go on motorways.
Well, there's always a responsibility. In fact, actually, there is a legal responsibility to do just that, certainly in European law, which says you must do that. I mean, if you take the simple example, a home one of the projects I worked on last year was the rugby, and the tolerance was very low. So a 40-minute delay meant that everyone missed their train home. And you had a big crowd in Twickenham that had nowhere to go. And of course they had plans in place to deal with that. I know that's not the centre of what you were asking there. I think if you're dealing with things like international trade events and the like, you do have to think, what is the walk-up? And the walk-up if you're Status Quo playing Telford International Centre, the walk-up is 20 minutes because the guy lives down the road, he's going to walk there, see the concert and go home. Okay, if it's a big music and entertainment event in London, we start to get much longer. Trade events is 48 hours. People are already on the plane going there. So you do have to factor that in. When you're talking about cancellation plans, for example, I never had a cancellation plan. I had cancellation D minus 48, minus 24, minus 12, minus 3, and then doors. Because you can still have a cancellation that isn't an evacuation, if you like. Yeah. You might decide, there are many reasons why you might decide that the venue or the event is non-viable, even if it isn't an actual emergency. an emerging threat that says, hey, look, we've had an incident down the road, this is far too close for comfort, we will now do a controlled cancellation of the event. So of course you have to think about that, because apart from anything else, if a crowd of people suddenly spills out at a time that no one was expecting, you're going to get minor operational issues in the grand scheme of things. But you do have to factor in the whole transport link, how are people going to get there in the wider sense.
One of a good example of that was running the New Year's Eve fireworks in London.
I was just going to mention that.
Was a classic example, because the stakeholder meetings, I remember the first one I went to, I can't remember how many people there were there, but it was like a small conference.
48.
Yes, it was going to be around that number.
It was massive.
Because everybody was included, so it wasn't just the exact locale of the event. It was transportation. Yep. It was the London Port Authority, all the boroughs. It was the guys who ran the cleaning, everything. Everybody was involved, and I think that's where we're great as an industry, is that we understand that it is this huge supply chain involved in what we do. It's not just us in a venue. It's lots of other things as well, and we have the capacity to think about that and deal with it as well.
I think the thing is about that event, which I remember distinctly, is the knowledge that the company gained in running the event actually put them at the lead of deciding when the stations were closing, when the roads were closing, and that collective was a very powerful and knowledgeable group. Any more? Sir?
Building on the ownership and responsibility question, often when we're dealing with events, there's a big strata from VVIP down to general public. And with these multi-stakeholder relationships we often experience in the industry, there's kind of a lack of command and control communication from an overall policy. Do you think there's a need for a high level of authority overall in events or for the country in that respect when dealing with events?
You're nodding, Mark.
Well, only because one of the the big things for me, and I think what I do sort of crosses over with what Simon does, in terms of communication plans, in terms of, literally having people already aware what they need to do, at what point. If something happened here, for example, I can see the tweets that are going on, I could see straight away what would happen if something happened at Coca-Cola next door, for example. The first thing that would happen is everyone would get on their phones. Everyone would start tweeting about it, and everyone would know things about it. Or your followers would know something before Reuters, before Sky, before anyone else. And so then, from our point of view, if we were the organisers of the event, we would need to know what we have to do at that point. Who is media trained? I'm looking at you, Kevin, because I know you are. But, who is media trained? Who is going to stand in front of the cameras at the front door talking whilst there is blue lights blazing behind? Yep. And that's the key thing for me. There's a lot of things that we do with our clients just to say, look, we don't want to say expect the unexpected, because that, there's enough things for organisers to be able to be worried about. And, there's a lot more. Again, as I said before, we're talking about physical here. We've not even touched on cyber. Everything that predominantly, a lot of things that we've spoken about today have been about physical. Yeah. There's a whole bigger debate on the cyber side. But for me, it's about communication plans. It's about agreeing who does what, who says what, and who's responsible for what.
Chris, is there enough command and control in our industry?
I think there is locally, but then once you get major incidents, major disasters, that things like the Civil Contingencies Act kick into place, various plans and procedures are put in place, and there is actually a system of a hierarchy command and control system, if you want, built in within the country. Whether it's as up to date and as relevant, and I think from listening to my colleagues here today, I question whether it probably is still up to date and relevant. Remains an unanswered question for me, to be honest with you. But I agree, there does need to be a separate hierarchical structure in there to take over. You can't have, we do it every weekend in this country. We have, 92 Football League clubs kicking balls around everywhere. So there's 40 odd stadiums, 50 stadiums somewhere. And we're talking an awful lot of people with mass transit movements, crowd management, crowd dynamics. That is being monitored. but it's not being managed and controlled at a higher level, it's all on a local level. So I think that there is room for improvement there, there is room.
We're running out of time, we've got 4 minutes left. I've got one more question, it's a one-line answer question. So someone's asked, is there one must-have for an event security brief? And I'll just go down the line. Is there one must-have for an event security brief? Simon Hughes.
Chain of command. You need to know who's ultimately in charge and who will call whatever needs to be called. So having a clear chain of command.
Simon Garrett.
I was going to have that one. No,
Think of another one.
I think you've got to be clear. I think there's a sort of wake-up call to everyone and saying, okay, why are we here? What are we focused on? I think people just come to, it's Tuesday and therefore I'm at this event, because it was in the diary, and I got on a plane and I went there, okay, so what are we on today? I think you do need to wake people up a bit and say, this is what we're about. If it goes wrong, these are the issues. Otherwise, this is what our purpose is here.
Mark, one must-have for an event security brief, and don't say insurance policy.
Well, yeah, of course. My comment is, and I'm sorry, I'm kind of going to agree with my 2 colleagues, crisis management plan. It has to be. You have to have a crisis management plan. You have to have a go, no-go. You have to have a good person in control who's going to make that decision and who's going to be able to disseminate it. You need to test that plan. That's possibly the most important thing for me. There's no point in looking at the plan and finding out that you've got 4 incorrect mobile phone numbers on there.
Yeah.
Because, hey, guess what? That plan's not going to work. So I think the plan, but more importantly, test the plan.
Okay. And Chris, finally, you. One must-have for an event security brief.
Information and communication. Correct information, relevant information, dissemination of information, who, what, where, why, when, even down to the lowest level, telling them enough, if necessary, telling them too much, but never telling them not enough, for me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Time's run away from us again. Just to mention, next month's EventHuddle is on Thursday the 17th of March, and we're talking about food wastage in the event industry. What can we do about it, and who's responsible for it, which I think will be a very interesting debate. So it just remains for me and you to thank an amazing panel.